The Season 5 patch has dramatically shaken everything up, but there are some characters that are left in the dust. That's why in this video, we're going to go over the 10 biggest losers of Season 5. Not necessarily characters that you can't main or play, but characters that are going to be substantially weaker than they were in 4 or in previous seasons. Now, the Marvelrivals Academy has been absolutely booming, but if you want some private coaching sessions, I am now offering VOD reviews on my Patreon. Not only will you get your own personal VOD every single month, but you also get full access to all the other coaching VODs so you can actively learn every single day. There's only 10 spots available, and once they fill up, they're gone, so definitely check it out in the links down below if you're interested. Now, the first character on our losers list is undoubtedly Black Panther. This is a character that not too long ago, everyone was clamoring for nerfs and that he was super busted. But the unfortunate state of Black Panther is that he's just really weak relative to the rest of the roster, the alternatives, the counters. There's so many things that make it very hard to play Black Panther. One of the things that's important to point out is that a lot of supports just got buffs, or especially survivability buffs. Cloak and Dagger now 275. Invisible Woman being able to shield herself. There's a lot of buffs to the supporting role, and really everybody, because there was also very powerful DPS, characters like Daredevil, Bucky, and Sai. And in patch 5, you'll note that they decided to not nerf a lot of these outliers. There was little outliers here and there, Venom, the DPS ones I mentioned, the support ones, and instead of doing that, they decided to buff a whole bunch of other stuff to bring them to that higher power level, so that the idea is everyone gets to have fun. And whether you agree with that or not, the reality is that some characters got left behind, and Black Panther is one of the biggest ones, because in the world of everything being strong, and Black Panther was honestly already struggling before against a lot of comps, now he's really struggling. Not only are there characters that can just straight up hard counter you, characters like Thing, characters like Bucky that see a lot of play, even Daredevil tracking you, but supports can fight back and they're very, very hard to kill. And the biggest problem is that it's just really unforgiving to play Black Panther. If you mess up, you have massive amounts of downtime or you die. And there's a lot of other characters that just don't have that downtime, or they can get out and stay alive. Like, think of the survivability of something like Daredevil. He gets to go in, potentially blitz the backline, and even if it doesn't go right for him, he probably gets out because he has his deflect. He gets to get back to his team, and then he can still brawl and contribute to the fight in a lot of different ways, and he has less downtime altogether. And Magic, similar thing. These are characters that just get to contribute to fights in more way than just their play. And basically, when Black Panther's play doesn't work, which is often, especially if your opponent's willing to counter swap even the slightest, you're gonna just be losing, and you gotta swap off BP. Now, I do think that BP can be good in certain situations, like being able to catch your opponents completely off guard is really powerful when opponents are not expecting it. Like jumping out of a strange TP on BP, you could clutch up a fight very, very quickly, and the fight's going to be over anyway, so if you can't get kills, it doesn't even matter. But for the most part, when actually given time to like analyze, know there's a Black Panther, swap if you need to, which you don't always even have to anymore, Black Panther is going to feel very underwhelming. Now, for a similar reason, the second character on this list is our first tank, Thor. Now, Thor was finally, in my opinion, in a great spot in 4.5. Being able to pair really well with like Angela, double team, double tank compositions that are really good against frontline tanks because you can just constantly kidnap them. Thor was also really good at marking divers, really good at marking caps, really good at interacting with characters like Venom. He had a lot going for him. He was also reasonably good against Flyers too, and there was just a lot to like about Thor in the last meta, and I thought he was legitimately good. I put him in my A tier, and I still stand by that. He was really good before, and it's not that he's bad all of a sudden, because he's just the same character. He's just the tank that got left behind. Every other tank was either stronger than him, or they got massive buffs. So where does that leave Thor? Kind of back where he's been just forever, as probably the worst tank. Now, is he unplayable? No, absolutely not. I think you can still play Thor, and I think Thor Groot, with Groot being so strong, Thor is really strong with and against Groot, and I think Thor Groot has a lot of synergy as just a frontline tank comp that's really, really good, being able to wall things off and then have the overwhelming damage to finish it off, especially in a lobby where you like ban ammo or whatever. I think Thor can be really, really great, but all around, if I'm looking at what to suggest to main this season, Thor is very, very low on that list because there's just so many powerful tanks that you could justify easily running, and Thor is just not one of them. Now, like I said, I love Thor, I like to play Thor, and I still think you can carry with Thor especially through the lower ranks to the higher ranks. But you're gonna really start to see him fall off in the higher ranks, where there's just more strong, more busted, more powerful things that you can do that's not Thor. So unfortunately, for a lot of the same reasons, Black Panther got left behind, so did Thor, and it just makes it really hard for me to recommend him this season. If you're trying to pick up someone new, I think there's other ones that I would recommend. Now, this next character is one on this list, not because he was left behind, because he was abandoned for a long time, and it's Ultron. Remember, Ultron was kind of the character that created triple support, or he was like the cornerstone of the triple support around Human Torch and sometimes Star-Lord. Well, he got really nerfed, and then he was pretty bad. He was better than people thought, but he was just not played all that much. And now all the other supports got buffed, but not Ultron. He's kind of just sitting in the corner, you know, moping, left behind. Like, I do know that there are uses for Ultron, and it's going to be specifically in triple support, like up against hyper dive comps. You still get quite a bit of value there. But choosing Ultron over Jeff, Mantis, Adam, or especially Gambit is really hard to justify over any of those characters in a triple support. Now, alongside maybe one of them or two of them, you could maybe make the argument, but Ultron is just gonna feel weaker than a lot of supports in a world where all of them get buffed, and they were already better than him. In the same way that we talked about Thor, they were just better all around, more flexible, more power, and then they all got buffed and he didn't. So Ultron, unfortunately, is just in the state where it's hard to justify playing him over other things. Not saying you can't win, and especially if opponents are playing, like I said, a hyper dive, Ultron's going to be great at shutting that down in the same way he was before. But overall, a lot less utility than characters like Mantis and Gambit can provide, and really not a massive recommendation this season. I think they probably could have gave Ultron some small amount of buffs going into this patch, but they probably were just a little bit afraid of triple support if they made Ultron too strong. So that's what we're left with, a state where Ultron is undoubtedly the weakest support right now. Now, the next DPS we have on this list is actually Scarlet Witch, a character that I don't even really think is worth playing even in low elo unless you really like Scarlet Witch. Like, before, the character was a character that dominated low elo, and then as skill ceilings rose and skill rose, mechanical skill rose, she fell off, but she was still okay. Now she's basically unplayable in the higher tiers, and then, like, I wouldn't even really recommend learning her, because what's the point in the lower tiers, unless, like I said, you really just want to make her work. And I think if you were dedicated, you could make her work, but think about all of the really, really strong DPS last season. The creme de la creme, the Hella Namor, the Psylocke, the Star-Lord, the Diddy. Like, there's so many powerful characters to pick, right? And now there's even more powerful ones to pick, because a whole bunch of other DPS got buffed too close to their level. So there's just so many more options, so many great DPS to choose. And then Scarlet Witch, who didn't get buffed and was already not meta, and so she's even just falling further down. And I have a hard time recommending Scarlet, because she's just not a character that's going to translate well as you get better. Like, you're gonna learn this character, learn the intricacies, learn everything you need to know, and then from there your game sense is going to be tested and your positioning is going to be tested, but you're not developing mechanically. Scarlet Witch doesn't really have a lot of crossover with other characters, and she's just feels weak. I think especially her ultimate is really hard to get value with consistently. So you just combine all that together, and I just can't really recommend Scarlet Witch this season. I think this is probably one of the worst times to ever pick her up. And yeah, I mean, the gap between the good and the bad characters in this game has definitely gotten wider in season 5, even if there are more goods now. Like, there's more viable good characters, but I think that middle ground is kind of getting eliminated in some way, where there's just a lot more characters that are just really hard to justify playing now. Now, the next character is one that's on this list, even though I would recommend learning him and playing him. It's Doctor Strange. And you might be like, whoa, Doctor Strange is still good. And yeah, he is really, really good, but he's definitely weaker than he was last patch, because last patch he was dominant. He was winning the brawls on frontline against characters like even Groot sometimes, characters like Thing. He was able to just constantly output crazy amounts of damage. And of course, everyone needs to know Strange so you can portal back. And, you know, powerful team-ups with Magic. But you got to think about several things kind of going into it. So Magic didn't get buffed, and neither did Strange. I think they're both still fine. They didn't need a buff or anything like that. But remember, the power level of everything goes up. So by comparison, these characters go down a bit. Another thing to consider about Strange is that not only is he weaker in comparison to a lot of these other tanks that are seeing play, Wolverine's rise is definitely not something Strange wants to see because he's one of the few tanks that is a legitimate Wolverine victim. I think other tanks have way more counterplay options than Strange does, and you might even make the argument that Groot has more counterplay options now with his wall being able to make him CC immune, even though maybe that's not true depending on the map and the choke point where you can hide the wall. But Strange can definitely be that freaking Wolverine victim. And don't even get me started on freaking Gambit, because Gambit is making it really hard to play all kinds of characters sometimes, like cleansing Groot ults and Angela ults and Strange ults. It's a lot, and Strange has always had to play around a million things, but with Hulk's flying around with more bubbles, Magneto's getting double bubbles, and Gambit cleansing you, wins the opening to ult. When you finally see the opening, oh, there's no invisible push, oh, there's no bubbles, oh yeah, I can go in, oh, it gets cleansed, okay, cool. So, you know, it's really hard to play make in the same way. I'm not trying to make the case that Strange is bad, by the way. Strange is still really good, and you can still carry with him, of course you can, but he's not as good as he was last patch, and it's pretty substantial. Like, I think even maybe down a whole tier is how much weaker, but once again, still a great character to learn, and a character I think everyone needs to learn. You never know when you need to port back, whether you're a tank, DPS, and support, so I still recommend him, even if he is on my losers list. The number 6 is actually Loki, and Loki is one that actually got a buff. Sure, like, why did Loki get put on this list? Well, the problem is that he just didn't get enough. So his buff was probably less substantial than almost any of the other buffs throughout the supporting roster. So, you know, it was a nice buff, but it was less substantial than that. And those characters were already better than him. So if he rose up to a certain level, they rose up even past that, because Invis was already like more powerful than Loki by quite a mile, and a lot of other supports were. So in a world where they just did this patch to Loki and they didn't change any of the other supports, I think Loki would be looking a lot better, in a much better spot. And I don't think he's terrible now. You could still copy characters like freaking Gambit, which I think is potentially really powerful. His ultimate, you can get the team up with Mantis that I think is still really, really strong. So there's still reasons to play this character. However, when you just look at the power level, the raw power level of characters like Rocket and Invis right now, and then Jeff was very, very strong in the previous meta, and, you know, he's definitely weaker now because other characters are better in comparison, but the buff to Loki didn't really clear the gap between Loki and Jeff. So I'm not saying that Loki's unplayable or anything like that. I just think that it's a particularly hard time to play Loki in the meta too, and the buffs were not enough. Remember, Loki does struggle to characters like Daredevil. Loki does struggle against Moon Knight, who's particularly good, and Loki super struggles against Venom. Venom is just like basically free eats. He can bait out your totems very easily. So all of that together with the buff that was probably just not enough make it so that he's not like a 10 out of 10 character right now. Still think you could justify learning him, and I think he can be good, but I don't necessarily think you would want to pick him over a lot of characters, especially like Gambit right now. The number 7 on this list is actually 2 characters, DPS characters, Torch and Ironman. 2 characters that just right now, it's not a great spot for them. Yeah, you could get away with it if you're really great at Torch, and you could get away with it if you're really, really good at Ironman. But with buffs to characters like Jean, her range, so she's just better at dealing with flyers, to what feels like every character having a way to ground, you know, things flying up and punching you to the ground, Thor's flying up and grounding you, like Bucky's just grounding you randomly. Like, it just feels like everything has a way to interact with you no matter what, and you don't have a lot of great survivable tools. So the combination of all those things and just the hyper strength of some of the other DPS options, it's hard to justify playing Torch over like a Star-Lord, over a Psy. It's hard to justify playing any of these characters over many of the powerful pokers or divers. It's just hard to justify. Not saying they're unplayable. You become a specialist at these characters, you become really great at these characters, you can definitely carry, I think, Iron Man, especially if you can find windows, especially in a world where maybe Magneto's banned or not around. Finding windows to kill through defensive ults, that's cool. But the meta has become a lot less about like this hyper sustain, we're all in on this Luna ult, and more about trading backlines and bum rushing and playmaking. And that's really not the kind of fight that Iron Man wants to have. He would rather the opponent be all in on these survival ults and then just fold to Iron Man ult, rather than just everything being super tempo, super fast paced, because Iron Man doesn't operate in that environment as well as other characters do. The number 8, one that you might not ever expect to be on this list, Emma is on our losers list, and it feels like the power creep of Emma, because I think it's pretty clear that when Emma released, she was obvious power creep. She was very strong, way stronger than anything in the tank role, especially on release. She was just insane, and they had to nerf her a whole bunch of times, and honestly still very hard to play into, especially with a lot of characters, a lot of tanks especially. She could be very oppressive even in her most nerfed state. I'm not talking about her fun or whatever. I'm just talking about her viability and her strength. She was still very, very strong, and she still is very, very strong. But now things have just kind of caught up. Like, the power has just kind of caught up. Emma is not going to be able to just single-handedly stop a Diddy going in crazy, a Venom going in, a Cap going in, all these really powerful characters that have survival tools, or a Groot walling her off and being CC immune and just running her down, or Magneto being able to just outpoke her with double bubble and his Gambit team up. Like, there's a lot that is able to challenge her now. There's a lot that's able to keep up with her now. And we've kind of gotten to the point where I finally feel like the power creep has levelized, and it turns out that the devs were like, you know what? We can't nerf Emma for the 16th time. Let's just buff everyone else. that's kind of what they did. And, you know, we'll see how it works out. But that's basically what the state of Emma is. Once again, not saying don't play her. I think she's still one of the best tanks in the game. But she definitely has a lot more competition. And that's kind of what a loser is ultimately about. In a world where there's no competition, someone's going to be picked 80% of the time. But now half of that pick rate's going to another character. 25% of that pick rate's going to a third character. And then the character is now in a much more healthy spot where they're not picked nearly as much. But there are certain characters that you could be playing that you're like, oh yeah, I still want to ban Emma. Like, I do not want to be playing Strange up against an Emma. I do not want to be playing Thor up against an Emma. So it's going to be dependent on the situation, whether or not you still care about her or not. But I will say that there are very strong alternatives to Emma now in a way that might not be so true in previous patches. Now, the next two characters are characters that are still very, very good, but similar to Emma, they just have more competition now, Jeff and Luna. I talked about the power of Jeff, how he was extremely dominant in the previous patch, and he still is. I mean, he has great synergy with Venom, and he still is one of the best supports to pair with the dive. Very good, Diddy, Venom, stuff like that, Cap. Very, very, very good. And that's all still true, but once again, Jeff has more competition because there are characters like Rocket, just crazy buffed, Invis, crazy buffed, Gambit doing some nuts things right now, that it just makes it harder to justify. And I would even argue that in a lot of situations, Gambit can provide more playmaking utility for your team than Jeff can, even in a dive comp, which is like Jeff's best comp. So really, it's just kind of a world where there's just more competition. I think Jeff is going to be really great on maps where he can get free pull-offs really easily, and his ultimate is basically like, I press Q and I kill people. But the other maps, it's going to be a little bit harder to justify Jeff. Don't think he's unplayable. They'll still think he's like one of the best supports, but once again, a ton more competition is going to lower his pick rate overall. And then the next one is Luna. Luna, of course, is still strong. Still very, very great ultimate that can, you know, combo with DPS, still can enable dive, still has great damage making tools and a great freeze. So Luna is still great, but in competition, it's harder to justify playing her because Invis is so freaking good right now with her survivability tools. And in a world where things are coming after you, when Diddies are on your ass 24/7, you need to be able to survive. And Invis gives you a lot of tools to do so, and Luna's just doesn't quite stack up, especially with like out the Atom team up or whatever. Also, Rocket is just insane right now. A character that was already really, really good, comparable to Luna in power level, got a massive buff. So these are just characters that just didn't get enough to kind of, you know, make them in line. And I think it's kind of funny when, especially when we think of Luna and Emma. Once again, we're just looking at characters where they were like, you know what? We don't really want to nerf these characters. Like, we kind of like where they're at, but maybe they're a little too strong. What can we do? All right, let's just buff everything. That's kind of what they did. So once again, great characters. Still could recommend learning both Jeff and Luna, but there's going to be a lot more competition for those slots. And I think in some situations, there are going to be better alternatives. Also, I did want to note that in the Jeff situation, unfortunately for Jeff, because Gambit can slam down, right, with his alternate fire, he's really good at killing Jeffs out of Jeff ult. So that definitely doesn't help Jeff, but that's just one thing to consider. Then the last but certainly not least loser on this list is Squirrel Girl. She did get a slight buff, but it's not enough to matter. I think Squirrel Girl can still be fine against triple support and on certain chokes, but Squirrel Girl, unfortunately, is just one of those characters similar to Scarlet Witch that just doesn't really keep up with the power level of the game. If you're trying to get passive value from range, characters like Moon Knight, I just think get it a lot better. I think there's a lot of threats that are going to chase you down on Squirrel Girl, like Diddy, like Psylocke. So it's just going to be hard to just stay alive overall on Squirrel Girl. And with all the dive tanks and stuff like that, I don't really think I would recommend Squirrel Girl this season. And ultimately, she doesn't have a lot of transferable skills. So unless you were really just dedicated to be the best Squirrel Girl, then I would probably recommend something else in this patch. But let me know if there's any character you think is actually a winner that I put in the losers category, or is there any other losers that I failed to mention? I want to know in the links down below, and check out my private coaching if you want that, or you could check out the academy where we have so many people reaching above Grandmaster that we literally can't fill the low elo lobbies anymore. We're suffering from success, but you could be the next group that comes in and quickly climbs. Check it out in the links down below. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.